Okay, we should be all right. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right, so we have a quorum. We are recording and we are live on YouTube. So let's get the meeting started. Thanks, everybody. I know a bunch of people are away, so they'll be able to review this recording and get the meeting minutes next time. So it is 4:06. I'll call the meeting to order. We don't have the minutes from the I guess it should have been the, oh no, we're in July. So I'm sorry, thinking it's August. How scary is that? Okay, so we don't have the minutes from the June 21st meeting. We'll get them to you for next month. So I'm just going to turn it over to Francisco. I thought it was important that we spend a little time looking at the future land use categories. I know we went through them quickly last month, but I really want to focus on them this month, and then he will go into some findings from some build out analysis for some downtown sites that we had his sub-consultant take a look at, and then we can talk about the in-person meeting that we have planned to kind of work on the future land use map as a group. And again, for those members of the committee that can't attend that meeting, they can always set something up with me individually, and we could go over kind of where we're at with that. So Francisco, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sharon. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this balmy summer afternoon. As Sharon mentioned, we have a pretty straightforward agenda. I'm sorry, we're bouncing around a little here. And that is, we introduced the future land use mapping at our meeting last month, but based upon discussion that Jennifer and Sharon and myself had, we decided just to take a step back a little bit to make sure that you all understood the purpose of the future land use map, the land use categories and how they'll be used. And this is all really in anticipation of gathering in person in August to really map things out. And that was, we heard from a couple of you at our last meeting, you thought that would be a beneficial way of moving forward. So that's exactly what we're doing. So we want to get you thinking about this ahead of time, make sure we're all on the same page with respect to exactly what the future land use map is and the categories that we're considering. And you need to think of those each as, well, I'll show you in a minute, each as a color on the map that we together need to make decisions about. So that's the first part of our presentation. It'll look all familiar to you because you saw it last month. And then the second half is to review, as Sharon had mentioned, a build-out analysis that our sub-consultant CH Planning did for a few downtown sites. They are an architecture and planning group, and Ben Carlson, who we worked with on this, was the project manager for the TOD plan. So he brings a lot of that experience and knowledge from the TOD work to these specific sites. And the purpose of that exercise and that task was really to explore the potential for some typical downtown properties. And we picked 3 of them to begin with. And to figure out what is possible in terms of what could physically be built and what are the constraints to that development. And a lot of that surrounds existing zoning. And so we have an opportunity here within the POCD really to lay the groundwork that will enable zoning changes that will therefore enable some of these downtown sites to be built out. And that works towards a number of our goals. And so I'll talk about those a little bit later. And then we'll talk about our next steps because we're getting very close to the end of our process. And there's a lot of work done to date, yet a decent amount of work remaining. All right. So it is, I apologize, it's jumping around on me today. As a reminder, the future land use map it's not a zoning map. It is an integral part of the plan of conservation and development. And the purpose of the map is to guide zoning and land use policy. So this map will be valuable to the city and to you as you consider rezoning areas and as perhaps applicants come forward with rezoning proposals. This map will be a guide as to whether or not rezoning of that area to the use and type of zoning that is being considered is appropriate. And it's a guide in that way. Now, the future land use map is restrictive in that way. However, should a few years from now more information come to light regarding a certain property, you have potential, or at least the planning commission in their planning capacity has potential to amend the future land use map ahead of any zoning changes. So this will act as a guide, but we're not freezing things in stone. So it remains a workable map. And case in point, your existing map's 9 years old, and here we are considering a fairly substantial revision or reworking of it. The future land use map, it acts as a guide for zoning amendments. As I discussed, it's a guide for staff when making decisions about zoning. It's a guide for the commission as well. And it is exactly that. It is just a guide. It is not an actual enforceable mechanism as a zoning map is. So once again, some examples. Future land use maps take a lot of different forms. Some of them more conceptual in nature. By example, Woodbury on the left, real broad brush that we were painting with, very broad land use categories. Monroe in the middle, a little more granular and detailed, and Bridgeport on the right, very detailed and very closely aligned with at the time, their existing zoning. So the state doesn't tell us exactly how we should proceed. It's really up to us to determine what is going to best serve the city and best represent the ideas that are being advanced by the plan. To date, and I say to date because this is evolving, and we are open to your input on these categories. But to date, we've basically identified several categories as a starting point for the future land use map. So this would be our legend for the future land use map. And it starts with rural residential. And I'll walk through these one by one, and it goes all the way into industrial uses and some of the important environmental overlays that we want to show on the map. So rural residential, what is that? Well, I think we have some comparisons here, zoning comparisons here for you, just to help correlate these future land use categories with your existing zoning. Rural residential is typically where you have RA80 and some RA40 areas. It is an area that if you were driving through it, you'd feel like you're in the country. And we know that there are many parts of Danbury that are like that. We know that open space is really the biggest characteristic of those areas. However, there are homes located throughout. These areas, typically those homes are on, septic and a well. So these are areas that typically are not served by sewer and water infrastructure, and they also have limited transportation options. They may or may not have sidewalks, very often don't, typically not served by transit lines. And these areas are really most represented by the northern part and the extreme southern part of the city. Next to that, and we're generally increasing with intensity here, is neighborhood residential. These are areas comprised of mostly single-family homes located on small to medium-sized lots. And they're a place where if you drove down the street, you feel like, oh, I'm in a neighborhood, a fairly, moderately densely populated neighborhood. They tend to be closer to the center of the city, and because so, they are often served by sewer and water infrastructure, more likely to have sidewalks and closer proximity to transit as well. Medium to high density residential, these are the areas closest to the core of Danbury, closest to the downtown. Which isn't to say that there aren't other areas that we want to identify outside of the downtown that we wouldn't want to identify as such. By example, maybe some areas of the west side fall into this category. So primarily comprised of multifamily homes, mid-rise buildings, almost exclusively sewer and water service, almost always sidewalks, typically good access to transit. Neighborhood commercial, these are the little clusters of commercial development that are scattered throughout the city, typically in a neighborhood and typically located at an intersection. May be a mix of commercial and residential use. Think of a corner store with a residential above it. Whether that be a kind of a historic type development or newer development. So you have your existing neighborhood commercial areas, and those are easy enough to identify by looking at your zoning map. But as we start to think about our future land use map, we might want to think about are there other little nodes throughout the city that would be beneficial to have a mixture of uses. So there are other opportunities for this type of land use. Corridor commercial, these are your commercial corridors, Newtown Road and others such as that are aligned with businesses, strip malls, offices, whatever it may be. And those are typically correlated with CA80, CG20, CL10 zones. They typically have sidewalks, good access to transit, and served by sewer and water. Downtown mixed use. Is there? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's just me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to just bring up one point, and I think we just forgot to put it on there. We talked about it in the neighborhood residential, which is like four slides back, which was at the 20, and some of the I think the 8s go in there. The RA8s, like those are smaller. Deer Hill, Pleasant Street, Paul. Those are areas where they are neighborhoods on small lots. They're without a doubt. So when you start to think about that. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
And so I think there's some RMF4 in there too. I mean, I know there is RMF3 and 4.
That would fall under this general description?
Yeah, on Pleasant Street anyway. I'm not really too sure about Jefferson and Washington, but I've got an RMF3, I got a couple of RMF3 or 4s on Pleasant Street. I mean, I'll defer to Sharon, but I'm familiar with them.
Yeah, there's no R3. There's no RMF3. There are three. There's an R3.
Yeah, the nomenclature.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I think we had the R3 in the medium to high.
But they're kind of salted away here and there, grandfathered, whatever.
Yeah.
Those are old neighborhoods. I mean, they're 140 years old.
Right, but they're a neighborhood. They're a
they are. No, they're absolutely established neighborhoods. You bet.
So
families have been there for
high.
50 years.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right. So let's go back to downtown. The downtown mixed use area is everything you associate with the downtown. It's your central business district, zoning district. However, we've had many discussions about really the importance of expanding the geography of the downtown, of thinking further north, south, and east. And this is our opportunity to show that on a map. And so the next step would be, and this would be subsequent to development of the plan, would be that the city can then take what we've committed to in expanding our geography of the downtown and do some zoning work around that. So we want to make sure that you understand that as we start to develop the mapping when we meet in August, it's really not about identifying where the downtown is now, but doing that and identifying opportunities for the types of uses and intensity of uses that you see downtown to expand outwards.
Yeah,
We
and I
wanna
think
show
that, yeah, and I think you'll see that when Francisco gets into the next part of how
Yeah.
we look at those development sites. You'll
Right,
see
we
what
have-
that could mean.
We have some very specific examples for you. West Side mixed use is mostly associated with the current PND, which, there's a variety of uses in that right now. It's some medium to higher density residential, the Summit property as well. And here we're pretty much likely documenting what's there, reinforcing that in the future land use map. But once again, potentially looking at the surrounding area, should those mixed use areas expand at all? Regional mall, that is very obviously representative of where Danbury Fair Mall is. And I think the notion of identifying this specifically as a land use category will be to try to give that property some more flexibility and options with respect to what the zoning currently allows. Expand things a little bit and encourage a movement in that way. We've had many discussions about residential not being ideal for the site given flooding issues and other issues. So that's noticeably absent from this description. However, in the course of doing this work, if you feel otherwise, and please make a case for it. Industrial, I think we expect that the future land use category for industrial land use will most likely document exactly where your industrial zones are right now and many industrial uses. We know we've had a lot of conversations about not wanting to lose industrial land, about how valuable that is to Danbury. That being said, the city does have a lot of discrete parcels of historic industrial use that are scattered throughout the city. And I think this provides us with an opportunity to think about each of those properties and decide whether or not we want to commit to those remaining industrial. Is it beneficial for a single parcel that may be surrounded by residential or mixed use or commercial use to remain as industrial? Or should we paint a different vision for the future of that parcel because of its surrounding land uses? So while we're definitely, I think, looking to preserve large areas of industrial land, and there are areas where it's very obvious it's going to remain industrial, former landfill, wastewater treatment area, some of your heavy industry. I want you to think about these smaller industrial uses that are scattered throughout, that are zoned industrial right now, mostly because they were historically industrial, and to think about whether or not it's our vision we support those remaining industrial in the future. Institutional uses, we want to map out the institutional uses, and so there are some large institutional uses that are very obvious: Western Connecticut, FCI Danbury, the hospital, Danbury High School, Abbott Tech, and some other Danbury schools. The value of this process is that most of those institutions are located in residential zones. And the value of identifying them as an institutional use is to really reinforce and cement that property as an institutional use. By example, and I think we talked about this a little bit at last month's meeting, if Western Connecticut State University decided they wanted to shift all of their classes and offices from White Street entirely to the West Side campus, if that made sense to them, and that's certainly not a proposal. What do we want that property to be? Because right now it's not zoned as an institutional use. And by identifying that as an institutional use, it helps to reinforce the notion that that's important that property continues to serve that role within the community versus be redeveloped for commercial use or residential or whatever it may be. That's assuming that you support that approach. Okay. Open space. We are in the process as part of developing a plan and building upon work that we did months ago of documenting all of the open space in the city, parcel by parcel. And we have some very obvious open spaces, whether it be city parks, state park, water company properties, land trust properties. However, there are a bunch of tiny little parcels scattered throughout the city that were set aside as open space by subdivision developments that may have a conservation easement on them. And we are trying to map that out ahead of time so that we get you a map that has all of the open space mapped exactly where it is. And the reason being is because I think we're all on the same page that we want that open space to remain in that use for the foreseeable future. And that's not really anything that's questionable. However, a lot of those open spaces are in residential zones. And not all of them are afforded the level of protection that a city park or a deed restricted or a land trust property is afforded. Some of them happen just to be open space, and they are otherwise not protected. So if we as a committee think that there are certain parcels that are worthy of future protection, even though they're not protected now, that are open space, then we want to identify that as such in the future land use plan, because that lays the groundwork for moving in that direction with those properties. And it steers those properties away from any sort of future development.
Francisco, can we add, and I didn't think of this before. Yep. So Ed, I'm going to jump right in because I know you're chomping at the bit. So the cemeteries?
Yes,
we should put them in this category.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't. I mean,
and there's over 20 of them in the city.
Right. They're not going anywhere.
Yes.
Nobody's moving there. All those bodies are up. So.
Yes, thank you. And we have been mapping those. It was just an oversight not to list it here, but we have been mapping those.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I, it goes without saying that we want those to remain. We don't want anyone digging up graves and moving them for, residential high-rise development.
Some of them are very small. So
Yeah.
I'll be anxious to see the mapping to check it against
the
list that I have to make sure we get everything.
And it would be helpful to have you check, because if they're very small ones, it'd be easy for us to miss. We don't, we have a lot of data that was given to us by the city and some state level data that we've been using to map. However, I can tell you, we don't have a data layer that's called cemeteries specifically. So we've been trying to build that as we go along. So another set of eyes on it would be much appreciated.
That would be a really good idea. I mean, there's Long Ridge, which is tiny, but everybody knows it's there. If you're in the neighborhood, it's there. But right. There are now cemeteries in Danbury that have vanished. They're still there, but nobody knows where they are. There's one on Wayata. There's one on the corner of West Worcester and Deer Hill, and they're essentially invisible. They're still there, but they're invisible. Yeah. Having a map like that registered at the town clerk's office would go a long way in steering development around those parcels. And
also to provide management long term and control.
Yeah, we've talked about that issue as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you could just share, if you can share that list, that would be wonderful.
Yes.
Can.
And then we can find, tax, if it's not on there, at least the tax assessor parcels, and maybe create a GIS layer,
I think it'd be great.
Internally. Yeah. That would be helpful.
Thank you. And our last two categories are overlay categories. You are not going to have to identify these because they just are what they are. Flood zones, we think it's beneficial to show those as an overlay on the map. because it really does restrict the type of development in those flood zones. And we've recommended just mapping the 100-year floodplain because it's the most restrictive. 500-year encompasses much larger areas, and it is development in that area is a little less restrictive. And also aquifer protection area, you only have one. It's really important, surrounds your Lake Kenosha wellheads. And we want to show that on the map because that is also an area where certain types of uses are restricted.
And the map will show the water bodies as water bodies.
Yeah, it will have our water body, as you would expect, shown in blue on the map, so that it would be very obvious that those aren't parcels available for development. Okay. Any questions on that?
If the public's allowed to speak, I'd like to go back to the regional mall category.
Tawny, with all due respect, if you have any comments, I mean, this is the committee meeting, not a public hearing kind of. So if you have some comments, you can share them with me and I'll share them with the group, but I'm not going to open this up to just at this point, public comment for everybody who might be listening. This is a committee meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions or comments from our committee members?
Well, I have a question. So with the meetings that we're having in person, is the goal to sort of dive into these a little bit deeper? I just want to make sure that I'm aware of as to sort of what the expectations are for those conversations.
Yeah. You want me to explain it a little bit?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it, and Sharon, you
Perfect. Thank you.
round it out wherever I might have missed a beat here. I want you to imagine that this is a 12-pack of Crayolas we're going to give you, and as a committee, we're going to have a map, and you're going to color that map in with this box of crayons. Okay, and that's the intention of that meeting. It is for us realizing that we might not get it at 100% within that meeting. But the intention of that meeting is for us to map out all of these areas, to develop a draft of that map.
Yeah, and I would just add to that so let me explain to you a little bit about how I think it's going to work. We have now a brand new zoning map. I had it printed, several copies of it printed. Not the color zoning map, but in black and white. So the underlying zones are shown there, but it's at 1,000 scale. So it's a big map. It's 51 by 40 something. So our intent was to kind of carve out the things that I think that we don't really need to be discussing. For instance, Farrington Woods, it's going to be green. Why? It's a park. Rogers Park is a pond. A park. I don't think we have to kind of discuss those. FCI is going to be labeled an institution because that's, I think, what it is. Unless, we want to go back and revisit it. But again, it's a parcel by parcel map. And so we're going to try to carve out the things, maybe the north end and the south end that are the rural residential that we kind of know are going to stay like that, and really I'm going to try to focus everybody on, that swath that Francisco showed at the last meeting, along 84, and focus in on those areas where, we need to look at whether or not the land use should change and can change. But to take away the things that I don't think there's we need to have a lot of discussion about, like city-owned parks, like Bear Mountain Park. I don't, the Westman property that we took as open space. I don't think or the cemeteries. I don't think there needs to be a lot of discussion about that. But again, with Francisco kind of zoomed in, we're going to sit around with those maps and come to some consensus. And again, for those who can't make the meeting that night, I'll sit with them, myself or Jen, and go over kind of where we are. But that's the intent of that meeting. And I think it's better off done, in person than trying to do it, this way through Zoom.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I appreciate the explanation, Sharon. Hi, Francisco. Sorry, I had to switch devices here because my Wi-Fi was.
Yeah, I saw you froze up. PJ, I thought I left you speechless for 2 minutes.
Hey, you did. That's all,
What did I
Francisco.
say?
It's that impressed. Looks like I had a smile on too, so that worked out well. Thank you.
Sharon, Francisco, just to go back to institutional, Francisco made some good points. I'm sorry, industrial. Some good points about the age-old tension between a older industrial site that then has a residential component that's built up afterwards, and that always is the age-old tension. It's a continuing problem, and it will be forever. And despite the fact that we have to rezone Apple Ridge to something else to get a school in there, there are, in this day and age, a lot of industrial concerns that I think, besides the aesthetic value of looking at a big building, can fit into a neighborhood. And just food for thought as mankind, we could have rezoned that and there could be houses in there now, but instead there is a quiet, clean factory filled with factory workers making important medicine silently and without pollution, providing high-paying jobs. So I think the initial idea that, oh wow, there's these old moribund sites and we could never get a smokestack factory in there. While that's probably true in this day and age, we're not really building a lot of smokestack industries. And a case in point was the 1970 rezoning of the entire west side for industrial, which would never have happened in the 50s with the prevailing winds blowing from west to east. You'd rezone the east side long before you rezone the west side. But it was appropriate in the 1970s because the smokestacks were being cleaned up and disappeared. So that tension exists, but I wouldn't be so quick to just say, oh, it's a small site and there's houses around it, so we really should just fill it in with more houses.
No, I would tend to agree with you. I mean, we're going to have to look at that's why it's good to have the underlying zoning, but I wanted to use the black and white map because, to think about it as another color, when you're looking at a color, it's kind of, it's hard to not focus on that. So, it's kind of sort of a blank slate, and should it stay that way? And if it is, and it's IL 40 or IG 8, maybe it should. And right, we shouldn't say just because XYZ will change it. Maybe it just needs to be in the IL purple color.
Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, this is our opportunity, Paul, to have that conversation.
I'll just add, this is Arnie, on a lighter note, a humorous note. So I get on the zoning commission 1987. I was 26 at the time. This is 35 years ago. So I show up at my first meeting and this guy shows up. I'll never forget this. His name was Moose Miller. This was the guy's name. He owned property on Myrie Brook Road and he wanted to rezone a big piece of land on Myrie Brook Road because he wanted to put in like a teletheater, like a gambling teletheater, like an off-track betting. And this was my first meeting, and the city hall was jammed with people in opposition to this thing. So this guy gets up, and they named him right, Moose. He was a gigantic guy. And basically, he stood in front of the zoning commission at that time in 87, and he made the case that my land is zoned industrial, and the hat factories ain't coming back. So you better start thinking about new and more modern uses for industrial land because you're preserving all this industrial land for industry that is not coming back to Danbury. So that was 35 years ago. So as Mr. Rotello said, the age-old controversy in Danbury, we've been hearing about for a long time.
Yeah.
Should it stay industrial or should we do something else with it? That's not new.
Right.
Yeah, it's a perennial. It never ends.
Okay. Well, we have a chance here to give a lot of those properties and many of those areas another 10 years of life. All right, any other comments or questions on these categories, the whole process in general? All right, well, let's move on. As I mentioned, I worked with Sharon to identify 3 sites that are actually comprised, some cases comprised of more than one parcel in and around the downtown. And we'll go through these one by one, but we basically have a site on White Street, which is at the top, one on Pacquiao Ave, adjacent to the train station, which is in the middle, and then a Main Street site right next to St. Peter's Church and the Salvation Army building property. And the purpose of this is an exercise, right? We don't have proposals for these sites specifically. This is intended to look for the types of opportunities that might be available in and around the downtown, to figure out what can be built, and to figure out how the zoning might need to change to accommodate development. And the purpose of this is really to help guide us and help guide some of the recommendations that we make in the POCD to inform the future land use map, and really respond to all the things we've talked about need to be done. More housing concentrated where you have infrastructure and services. So I will go through these one by one. And here, once again, are the sites. And we're assuming primarily market-driven uses. So we have a general understanding of what the market is like. We did not do a market study, but we understand that's really being driven by residential right now with a limited amount of retail. We understand that generally you need much more density than what's currently allowed in order to motivate redevelopment. That parking is one of the biggest constraints or challenges in developing, particularly on smaller parcels. That we want development that's pedestrian friendly, is context friendly, that matches what you have or improves upon it. And we know we have a lot of zoning constraints that need to be overcome in order for that development to occur. So the first set of properties are 3 different lots, actually a number of different addresses. And that spans from 121 to 145 White Street. They're all on the north side of White Street, right across from Leahy's and the Danbury Railway Museum. Those are primarily auto-oriented businesses right now. And there are some views at the bottom, some pictures at the bottom of the screen there. This property it's right halfway between the Western Connecticut State University campus on White Street, downtown. It's right across from the train station. So from that perspective, it's a very desirable location. Maybe there's a potential for student housing. I don't know how strong that market is for Western. We know these sites are pretty small, they're shallow, so we're going to have limited options with respect to redevelopment on sites such as this. And so the development approach was really geared towards residential over retail, and in order to keep that development feasible from both the cost perspective and ability to park it, we looked at 3-story development and walk-up development, because with 3-story walk-up, you don't need an elevator. Now, taking a look, we did some modeling, or our sub-consultant did some modeling of the existing conditions and what the zoning currently allows. So those pinkish, purplish buildings represent the actual footprints of buildings, and they're modeled up or extracted up to their highest point, so up to the peak of the roof. Now, those buildings aren't necessarily shaped just like that. Many of them have pitched roofs that actually fall away quite a bit on the sides. But we just wanted, for massing purposes, to understand what's currently allowed and how development might fit in based upon the massing of what surrounds it. What we're looking at right now in the white boxes, those are our sites. And the white boxes represent the development envelope that's currently allowed by the existing zoning. It's how high can you go? How far can you push out within the setbacks and the height limits? And what we find is what is currently allowed with respect to height, it really serves the purposes of these sites because they are relatively small sites, and really it doesn't make a lot of sense to go too high because you have difficulty parking them, and the higher you go, the more expensive the construction costs. So one of our biggest limitations here isn't necessarily height. To a greater extent, it's probably setbacks. The setbacks are for a near downtown site or sites. The setbacks are pretty big at 25 feet in front and 20 on the side. So what we considered is what would things look like if we shrunk those required setbacks to 10 feet in front, 5 feet on the sides. And so now we have a much bigger development envelope to work within, and it can potentially free up a lot of space on the site. Additionally, and I didn't mention this on the previous slide, the building coverage for the existing area is 30%, which means you can have a building footprint covering up to 30% of the lot, and that's it. And that's also very restrictive. And so here we are anticipating a scenario where the building coverage is increased to 50%.
Francisco, could you rock that?
Yeah, I'll toggle between. Right.
Wow.
And here, if we also get rid of the side setbacks from adjacent development and allow buildings to be built right next to each other instead of a minimum side setback, that allows us to span more than one parcel with single building.
And let us not forget, and the key to this is this zone, this is an example, this is CG 20.
Right.
You can't build housing in CG 20 today. So if we're talking
that's
about,
our first barrier.
Yeah, that's our first, right, exactly. So, and we've talked about, more mixed use in the downtown, expanding the downtown and this covering the area, but just so that everybody knows that, today you can't, even if you wanted to build on the previous slide to those setbacks and that full development, it's not housing. There's no housing allowed there.
Right.
So key to this would be, should that zone be changed? Should those properties be in some other category that would allow this mixed use?
So now these are the building envelopes, which isn't to say you could build a building that's of this size, because then you have no place to park vehicles unless there some parking structure and below grade and first floor, and right away, the economics of it start to fall apart. So this is the type or scale of development that we think is feasible. And that is basically apartments or townhouses over retail, so 3 to 4 story development. And then those are the white buildings that we're showing. The purplish are existing buildings. And that allows for parking behind the buildings. So what's nice about this is you would have a very nice street front with active sidewalks, room for street trees. And these are pretty crude blocking models. Our next step in this process would be to do some renderings to show what it could look like. So anyway, parking would be behind, potentially maybe built-in parking on the ground floor behind the retail is possible as well. But this is about the scale and intensity that you can get at with a parking requirement or parking allowance of anywhere between 1 to 1.5 spaces or 1.25 to 1.5 per unit, and about 1 space per 250 square feet of retail. All right, any questions on this concept?
Just a quick question, Sharon. Are all those three? So I'm trying to think. This looks great. But do those three pieces owned by the same person? Do we pull the tax assessor's card to see who owns them, if they have any interest, or what do we do from here? Because I love these renderings, but
Yeah. So,
Well, no, we haven't talked to anybody. When I thought about, wow, picture's worth 1,000 words, we did a lot of this work, similar work in the TOD study, and people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that was that. And we talked, Francisco and I looked around at areas and parcels that I thought should they change from being, well, in this particular case, auto oriented. So we didn't have discussion with property owners, but people get incentivized, right? When they see, wow, I didn't think about that. Maybe I'll go move my auto window glass who's on the corner of Hollies and White Street, and I'll go somewhere else. But I could sell my land for XYZ or, so the answer to your question is no, we haven't had conversations. The only one which you'll see later on, as you know, as part of, because it came from the TOD study, is we looked at the east side of the parcel that's owned by Eversource, which would be on the opposite, down by Liberty from the transit center. If the buses were to move. Yeah, Pacquiao.
Pat Wheelk is screaming for that.
You will wait till you see those. Yeah. You'll see that, and that's way different than this. So we're trying to give different options.
There's like 100 private property owners in there. It would take an act of Congress to move that forward. But yeah, it's screaming for it.
But I'm just saying we only took the piece that Eversource owns and looked at it. But you're right. Further down towards the intersection, there's lots of property owners. But
okay.
And once again, this isn't necessarily a development proposal for this site. It's not like we picked the 3 sites in Danbury that the city needs to get behind for redevelopment. What we're trying to do is show examples and really model and prototype the opportunities that are around the downtown and what needs to change to support certain types of development. So
right.
These are intended to be case studies that we need to figure out how to present them within the plan. And ideally, we want the future land use map, and that's how it ties back into the first half of our meeting here this afternoon. We want the future land use map to support the types of zoning changes and redevelopment in areas such as this. So that's something you should be thinking about as we develop the future land use map.
No, yeah, I know it's not, like you said, it's not an active proposal, but
Right.
Once you identify it and you put up renderings, you get everybody excited. Boy, wouldn't that be great? Question the others, but anyway.
Okay, now also this. So we've had many conversations about how do you get more housing, particularly with the affordable housing plan work. And here we have a handful of properties, and 35 to 45 units are possible. And some street level block massing. I realize this is kind of hard to contextualize because it's all just shapes, but we're working towards developing something that reads more as a rendering. But right now you can tell that we're really looking to find the edges of the street and have it really read as more of an urban built form rather than kind of a sprawling open parking areas. So the development totals on this, we have a combined site area of 1.62 acres. We got our dwelling units there, units per acre. That gets us up to 23 to 27, which is pretty high units per acre. 13,000 square feet of retail. It requires a site coverage of 75%. That's total. So that's the building and pavement, which means that 25% of that remains as landscaped space, and 110 parking spaces with up to 3 stories. Now, what stands in the way, or what are some of the challenges? As Sharon mentioned, the zoning. Residential uses aren't permitted in the existing zone. The parking is very challenging. It's a big constraint, so it limits our density. But regardless, you can see we've been able to accommodate quite a few number of units, even with what is a pretty reasonable parking ratio of up to 1.5. Currently in that district, there's a minimum lot area of 20,000 square feet, and some of those lots, I believe, are below that. And so we need to reduce the minimum lot area for development. We talked about setbacks already. And the building coverage is too restrictive right now. It's at only 30%. We need to get up to about 50% to make that happen. Okay. Any questions or comments on White Street before I move on to the Main Street site? All right, let's move forward. So at Main and the intersection of Center Streets, we have a parcel adjacent to Salvation Army and potentially encompassing the Salvation Army building. Much of that area is occupied by parking right now, and of course, you're going to have a need for parking for any new development in that area as well. So parking is really, if I could just talk about parking for a little bit, parking is one of the greatest challenges to good urban design. And when you think of the best urban places there are, they are places that are served by transit that have a very low automobile use per capita, and that are able, the economics are supportive of putting most of that parking in structures and underground. So if you go to Manhattan or Boston or any other place, those are incredible urban places because they're not designing around the car. The car is secondary to the design. We don't have that same luxury here. And so we continue to design around the car, and that's probably one of our biggest constraints or limitations. That being said, as the economics support it, the construction of structured parking, whether standalone or within a new development, really frees up space, and it could be a really important part of this solution. That and expanding a transit service, the downtown, whether it's improved Danbury branch line service or new Maybrook line service, is just reducing the number of people living in and around the downtown that own a vehicle and are dependent upon a vehicle. So parking continues to be a big constraint. The design principles for this site that our designers were working with was really to have active ground floor uses along Main Street, to carve out some space for a small plaza, to go up to 5 stories. The spine or the roof, main roof line of St. Peter's Church is about 5 stories, so not to significantly exceed that, to be compatible with that, and to provide opportunities for little residential front porches, realizing, development in this site is likely to be larger in scale, and we want to give people access to the outside, and small portico porches on the building would be a good approach. So with that said, we're looking at a 4 to 5 story, multi-story, also potentially 3-story walk-up flats with retail on Main Street. And here, taking a look to take advantage of the grade of the site at Center Street. As you drive away from Main Street, the grade falls off, so it might enable some more cost-effective structured parking, taking advantage of that grade. So here is the existing development envelopes that are allowed. Once again, the purple are existing buildings. St. Peter's Church appears here as like a massive high-rise. That's just a model incorporating the highest peaks of it. We know that the CCBD zoning allows buildings to go pretty high, up to 75 feet, and 55 fronting Main Street. So that's what we're showing here. However, the CCBD zoning requires some very significant step backs above 55 feet, and those step backs are 18 feet. And that is, that's pretty restrictive, and to the point where those setbacks or step backs really aren't that viable. So it's unlikely you're going to see anything more than 55 feet because of that requirement. So that is the current building envelope that is allowed. And working within that envelope, we see that that envelope is generally sufficient to allow development within that envelope. That being said, getting rid of those big 18-foot step backs would be really beneficial to any development. But here we are again somewhat limited in our density and height, really by our ability to accommodate parking. So in this example, we show up to about 5 stories of development with the parking tucked underneath, and that is this area here with about 2 levels of parking underneath the structure, and then with residential development rising above that. So in total, we're looking at 86 units of housing, 6,400 square feet of retail. That's about half the size of CVS. And once again, a parking ratio of about 1.25 spaces per unit. And it does assume some shared parking with the residential and retail function. Now, taking a look from Main Street, what we see.
Just a quick question.
Go ahead, Paul. Yep.
There's parking and then there's parking.
Yeah.
It's what, 9 by 18 or something like that, whatever it happens to be. But then you've got Trader Joe's where you really can only park golf carts in there. What are you guys using for a parking space?
And typically in a structured garage, you're below what you would design for an open parking lot. So that would be as narrow as 8 feet, and
wow.
8 to 8.5 in a structured parking, and no deeper than the total bay width. Parking aisle parking would be a minimum about 50 feet. If you're in an open parking lot, it would be 60 feet. So that assumes really you're jamming in as much as you can.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
And we allow the reduction in the sizes of spaces currently if you're in structure parking too. I think it's 8.5. I might be wrong.
Yeah, and it's a pretty rare parking garage that's using the same kind of dimensions that you would use in an open air parking lot. So here we show across the face, those big bays across the face would be retail, with the residential stepping back from there, and that step back affords some plaza area. And then multiple tiers and levels to really open up things for light, potential rooftop deck areas as well. And once again, this is crude massing just to see what would fit on the site. All right, so our summary on that, we had a couple different variations of the scenarios depending on how some of the parking was handled. Our site area is less than an acre. So with 86 dwelling units, that means we're getting 97 units per acre. So we're at about twice the density of the examples we showed you on White Street, with 6,400 square feet of retail, and site coverage 100%. Or it may end up being because of the little plaza area with the landscape area, it might end up being 95, 98%. But the idea here is we're downtown, so everything's covered by some sort of development, parking, hardscape. 134 parking spaces with a little less than half those shared between retail functions and residential. And the height varying from 3 to 5 stories. Okay. I think if there's a takeaway from this, it would be that your height limitations in the downtown are fairly supportive of development, and it continues to be the need to park vehicles and the economics surrounding that are one of the biggest challenges. But that being said, the zoning could probably be a little more flexible. The step backs required over a certain height are pretty excessive, and there are some things that could be done to make development a little more flexible and allow for a little more creativity and design. But the constraints aren't, zoning isn't the primary constraint downtown.
And if I could just, as an example, so kind of you can think about this, the Bertram's building on Main Street, the new apartment building, they took 1/3, I think I'm right, Jen, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think they took 136-foot step back, and then they went straight up instead of doing kind of the tiered.
Yeah.
So they did comply because they went 18 feet, but they took it one, and that's where they put the outside pool and outdoor space for their residents. But below that is the commercial / retail space.
Yeah. And structurally, as I understand it, as a designer, it's not easy to do those 18-foot setbacks because the building, you have to carry that structure all the way down. So it's fairly challenging.
Yeah, you want to stack, you want to stack the infrastructure of the building and the units.
Right.
And when you have to consistently step back, it's a problem.
Right. So as I mentioned, the zoning constraints, we talk about parking, building height, and there's just historic infrastructure on Main Street downtown that is a challenge to work around and above. Okay, any questions or comments before we move on to our last site? All right. And when I pronounce it Pacquiao, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
I call it Pacquiao.
Oh, really? Pacquiao.
Yeah, Pacquiao, but that's me.
Okay. All right. I'm close. Good. So I think you're all fairly familiar with this site, and as Sharon mentioned, and really the idea for development in this area came out of the TOD planning process. There's a vision for an expanded transit center adjacent to the existing rail station, accommodate your bus hub and potentially more parking. And then further down Pacquiao Avenue is where we see real opportunities for some fairly large scale development. So that's a view right now. Empty lots, right? Derelict lots. They're used for staging for trucks, equipment, and I don't even know if they're being used now. But the neighbors don't have much to look at. I think the question, to Paul's point, there's a lot of neighbors along that road. What would they rather look at? A really nice development, or abandoned lot with weeds growing in it? So here we have an opportunity to do some development, maybe a small little pocket park associated with that. That might be something appealing to the existing residents. We've got a nice big site here, so that gives us lots of parking capacity and gives us some flexibility in design. And our general approach for both design and development here is to keep development lining the road relatively low scale, so it would match up with what's across the street, to provide a little variety in the design, some townhouse clusters and a larger building a little further up, and really looking up to mid-rise development, but nothing really tall. And here's the building envelope. As I mentioned, it's a pretty big site. By comparison, those purple boxes are the existing homes. And the setbacks here aren't too onerous given the context, 30 feet front, 20 foot on the side. That being said, it's always nice to have a little more flexibility than that. A height up to about 45 feet, you know, is fairly good considering the context. However, it's nice to have a little more room to work with, particularly if we consider the potential of stepping back. So here we envision a height up to 75 feet with the step back, which would allow 6 to 7 story buildings, shrinking the front setback to 20 feet and the side front to side. Once again, you're not going to be able to build a building of that size because you're going to need some open site for parking and circulation. Here we also consider expanding building coverage up to 50%. It's currently at 30%, which is one of the biggest limiting factors on development. So within that envelope, what we see as possible includes a small neighborhood pocket park, accommodating part of the transit center operations to the back, some clusters of townhouses on the left there and at the far right, in keeping with scale with the houses across the street. And then a much larger building that's set back from the road, so it'd be a little less overwhelming for the homes across the street. And in total, we have a fairly substantial, depending on some of the design options chosen, a fairly substantial unit count of 80 to up to 200 or 140 housing units. And once again, same parking ratios as well. Okay, and so that's I realize these are pretty crude models, but that's kind of the scale of what we're looking at along the edge of the road. So comparing a picture on the left, which is existing, to on the right, which would be about the massing and scale of the buildings if built. And as you can see, those townhouses would come up very close to the edge of the road with the larger parts of the building setback. The scale of that larger building is somewhat mitigated by the fact that the site, as you go further up Pacquiao Ave, the road climbs quite a bit and the site stays lower. And so as you climb up the road, you're really climbing above the development footprint. And so the scale of the buildings would even be less so, which is why we show the larger massing further up the hill. Pacquiao is climbing, and this is staying pretty close to level against the river. So what that gets us is we have about a 2-acre site. We have 81 to 95 dwelling units. This assumes one level of parking. We have a couple options here. So 81 to 95 dwelling units. That gets us up to 44 to 52 units per acre, which is actually comparable to White Street, about half as Main Street. A site coverage of both the building and parking of 65%. So that allows for quite a bit of naturalized ground covering. And in total, a little short of 200 parking spaces with height or stories varying between 3 to 6 stories. And then the other option, if there were 2 levels of parking built within the building, which would be more costly, however, it would free up ground area for development. We could get the dwelling count up to somewhere between 117, 136 units. That gets us up to 63 to 73 units per acre. So a lot closer to what we see on Main Street, maintaining the same site coverage, same number of parking spaces, and same overall building height. Now, the challenges or the constraints upon building that now are, first of all, the site zoned industrial. So that would have to change. And the setbacks within the existing district are 30 feet. They would need to be reduced to 20 feet. The building height is 45 foot existing maximum, which is actually, it's close to where we're at with the proposed building. However, an increase in the height would allow a lot more flexibility in design, particularly, if there were a section that you wanted a pitched roof or a penthouse type feature. And as I stated before, the maximum building coverage of 30% is really, you need a lot more than that for a building of that footprint. So you need to be able to cover 50% of the site with the building. All right, questions or comments?
I would just comment before anybody might have any other comments that if we're looking at where there's potential for housing, and again, it's a struggle because I get it, Paul, right? This is an IL-40 zone. It would need to be changed, although we've been talking about it since we did the TOD plan. But you can get, a lot of units on this site with some changes, obviously, to the zoning and notwithstanding that there may be some environmental issues, but that occurs where Kennedy Flat, that was the state of what Kennedy Flats was in before, and there's a lot of units there. So if we're trying to figure out how are we going to provide the number of housing or how we inch towards getting to those housing units that have been identified as being a deficit in the affordable housing plan, this is one site that is an example of what we could do and what we could potentially get there, which would overlook be adjacent to the tracks, the river's there, close to walking distance to downtown, hoping to get the Pulse Point relocated. I mean, I get there's a lot of ifs, but it offers the potential for that. And given the state of the geometry of Pacquiao is really that an industrial site that should stay industrial. I mean, that road has issues to begin with without us doing anything. I think we all acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of directed at me. And I think that a lot of these industrial sites are things that need to be considered individually. It's not flat. People seem to want flat for industrial. It hasn't been used as a job creation site in 75 years or something. The hat factories burned down. And it's so close to Main Street, and it is a keystone when it comes to people coming into the city, regardless of what Metro North or the train guys do. There will be a train station there, and people will be entering Danbury from that point. And right now, it leaves a lot to be desired. So a sort of a quasi blueback square. You guys are familiar with blueback square, in that area there. I wouldn't stop at the Eversource. I would go across the street and redevelop that whole area to make it a showcase for people entering the city. It would be phenomenally expensive and it would be unbelievably disruptive, but it would be one of those things that you did that 50 years from now, people would just be still remarking about how in one shot, they transferred an entire area of downtown Danbury from a sleepy small town to it entered the big city age. But yeah, I mean, you're right. You want to be as conservative as you possibly can with job creation, industrial sites, but in some instances, it makes a lot of sense to put residential in there. And I think this is one of them. And it wouldn't just be residential. I'm sure there'd be a retail, there could be a retail footprint in there, which is job creation, money changing hands.
Yeah, we actually in the TOD plan showed a building on the Patriot Pacquiao corner, which would sit in front of the bus facility, which was a mixed use building. So there was residential above retail, basically where the skate park is.
I had a constituent who wanted to flood the whole thing and put a pond there. And then I'm serious. And then he wanted to put like Miami Beach style hotels and condominiums around it. And it would be like a resort area in town. Peter, and I said, gee, Peter, that's great, but I don't think it's going to happen. But people have looked at that and said, there must be something better that we can do with that space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it might be a little optimistic to think we could convert it to Blueback Square. I mean, I love Danbury, but it's not West Hartford.
I'm just saying, I reached for something that somebody did, and that's what came up. So maybe I'll drive around some more and get a better example.
I've got a question. And also in the three presentations, you've highlighted the constraints, or as I refer to them, as the issues. What's the likelihood of getting these particular constraints or issues resolved or changed to comply with the structure you want to put there? And then who would do that? Would that be the developer?
Well, yeah, Rich, let me take a start at that, and Sharon can add in. It starts with us, and it starts with the future land use map. And so it's incumbent upon us to identify those areas, White Street, Packey Oak Avenue, as areas where we want to support higher density residential development, retail development, mixed use development. So that it starts there. We can also, within the plan, be a little more specific and intentional about areas as we describe them. So very much starts with the POCD and the future land use map and the work we're doing now. And then the next steps would be whether it was an initiative taken by the city to revise the zoning in and around the downtown as supported by the POCD. It would be the city and the zoning commission and the zoning function to undergo that effort of redistricting, revising coverage requirements and setbacks and doing all of that work. Or it could be that we've successfully planted a seed in the POCD that a developer sees an opportunity and understands that there's now support for that concept or idea. And the developer comes forward with a proposal with zoning rewritten for what they would need to develop. And that would be entertained by the city and the commission.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you very much. Very clear.
All right. Just a few images to give you an idea of what this type of infill development looks like in real life. And this does a much better job of telling the story than those block models that we showed you. These are examples from Stanford, and this was actually work that was done by Ben Carlson and his team when they did the Stanford TOD plan. So they did a lot of the visioning necessary that enabled the zoning changes that therefore enabled this development to be built. And so it took several years, but it's come to fruition. And there's a couple of minor examples. A pretty modest 3-story building, 2 levels of residential over lower level retail. And I don't know what that site was before, whether it was vacant, parking lot, likely a parking lot, or maybe an old tired 1-story building. But either way, small project, but contributes quite a bit to that street. And on the lower level, the right side is new development, more of a modern form of development. But that's 4-story development. You can see it steps back a little bit, and that affords some little terraces for residences. You have a lower level of retail with some plaza areas. And so I think these are the opportunities that we're creating, and developers and architects will bring their vision for what's possible to those sites. But we have to really create the opportunity that enables them to do so. And a few more examples for you. These are actually from Boston and smaller infill buildings. And these are tiny we showed these because these are really very small footprint buildings, not very deep, that are able to accommodate a lot of units and first floor retail. And I think everything that you would like to see in Danbury and in downtown.
Yeah, and I just would comment on the top left. So Ben had indicated to us in our conversation regarding his work that on that corner was an old paint store. So it's still there. It was a 1-story building and they just took it up, you know, 2 more stories and put apartments right over an existing building. So, you know, there's lots of potential.
So you don't necessarily need to displace businesses or uses. In many cases, it's about, you can potentially go up, you know, whether or not that structure can be added onto or has to be rebuilt is another issue. But here, yeah, we have a business that continued to exist with residential above it. Now the economics in Boston are different than Danbury. You know, that being said, the economics have changed a lot in the past year. So we want to be ready for a future where the economics will support this type of infill development. We want to ensure that the plan and your zoning is supportive of it and allows for it. And a couple more examples. These are bigger in scale and primarily residential. And so this is the type of development that we're envisioning for Packyoke Avenue. Townhouses mixed in with larger building. Okay. Well, we still have a lot of work to do. And so this August, next month will be a very important month. That working session to develop the future land use plan is going to be a really important meeting with a very important outcome. We are also in the process of compiling our implementation plan. Now you've seen all of the plan's recommendations, goals, and recommendations strategies to date. However, we're beginning to assemble those into a table that actually identifies priority level for each of those and the responsible parties and organizations. And we've had Sharon shared the goals and strategies with various other departments, and they've gotten her some feedback on that. And so we'll be bringing that into basically a summary that it's intended to be a great reference if you want to get right to what the plan recommends and who needs to be doing what the priorities are. So that's a really important part of the plan. We intend to have that ready for you to review. Moving on to September, we are preparing to have a draft plan compiled. This would be the first cut of the plan, all put together. So all the different sections of the plan, the implementation plan, future land use map and plan in one document to make it available to you for review. And it's our intention to get that to you before our September meeting, at least a week before, so you can review it. We can discuss, you know, if you think there are any revisions necessary. Upon your review and upon discussion at that meeting, and this would be towards the end of that month, we would then look to submit the plan to the Planning Commission, Council, and WestCog for review and comment to us. That begins part of the formal process, about a 65-day process that really gets things moving towards adoption of the plan. Coming back in October, we would hope by then we've received comment from Planning Commission, Council, and WestCog, and we can agree on any revisions to the plan that might be needed based upon comment that we've received. I should note that both Council and WestCog's, and to a greater degree WestCog's, input is advisory. We're not compelled to make changes based upon any requests. We could take it into consideration, and as a committee, ultimately it's your responsibility together with the other members of the Planning Commission to decide what belongs in that final plan. That will enable us to go into November with a final review of the plan based upon, you know, all that feedback to be reviewed by you, to be discussed, and hopefully that would be a very brief meeting and that we're all great with the plan and we want to move forward, which means we filed a plan with city clerk's office, hard copy made available to them in the office, and we posted online, and we opened it up to the public for a review period of 35 days, which enables us to go to a public hearing for adoption as early as December. It doesn't need to happen in December. It could happen in January. Could happen in February. Your former plan, I believe, was adopted, I want to say in June of 2013.
June is our date. Yeah.
We're ahead of schedule. We're not working up to the deadline. But that being said, we don't want to lose any momentum in this process. So it'd be nice to keep moving. We've been very much, on schedule, with the exception, we're carving out a little more time than we anticipated for the future land use process, but it's really important. And so we're keeping everything moving at the same time as we're focusing on that. All right. Any questions?
Yeah, I think for me, if I may, is I just have to keep reminding myself, that I'm not trying to determine what's proper for Danbury today. I mean, in 1975, if you had said we could build the biggest mall in New England, it would be a huge success. I'm not sure a lot of people would have jumped on board. In 1975, if you said we move a Fortune 500 company with the largest office building in Danbury, Connecticut, and it would be a raging success, I don't think a lot of people would have nodded their head and said, well, of course, it's time. But 10 years later, both of those projects came to fruition and they were huge. I lived in Hartford, in the west end of Hartford, for 20 years, from the late 70s, late 90s. And I was back and forth to West Hartford. This is just to Arnie's point. And West Hartford was a sleepy little bedroom community adjacent to Hartford. And there were a couple of shops where you could get ice cream and maybe buy some wine.
Yep.
If somebody said to me in 85, they'd build a Blueback Square and it would be huge, I would have said, that's ridiculous. It's never going to happen. But it did happen. It happened 10 years later, 15 years later. And your Packley Oak project may not happen for 15 years. And in 15 years, all bets are off. But the trends are really clear. This city is growing and it's getting better off. And people are going to want things that people who are better off want. And these projects that may seem pie in the sky today may actually seem, look at this 50 years from now, people look back, well, of course they built that. It made perfect sense, but it does take a leap of faith. But I think we're moving in the right direction,
Well stated, Paul, well stated.
I mean, when you think about where the city was when we were kids, Arnie, remember the Danbury, the Main Street Mall? That was, I couldn't believe that mall. That was like it came from outer space. Wow. And then, it's like, holy smokes. I bought my shoes, but I don't know, we shopped at these little stores on Main Street. And to me, they were, Janung's was this gigantic department store.
Right.
Things have changed so much in this town. And I think they're just going to keep changing.
Yeah, if we could, I agree, Paul, if we could just get some people that own these strategic properties to think long-term, think outside the box and come out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Danbury's got a ton of potential. There is no.
Now we're really dreaming, Arnie.
And we need to give them a bigger, more permissive box to work in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So that's where we're at in the schedule. We've done a lot of work to date, and it's all starting to come together. So we're getting very close. And so our next steps right in front of us are to continue the development of the future land use map at that August meeting, to finalize the implementation plan that I discussed, and to continue development of the plan document. We do have a few sections of the documents written. I've shared that with Sharon, so we're reviewing internally, and we've got so many moving pieces. We want to make sure that that's as close to where it needs to be as possible before we share it with you. So that's why you haven't seen that yet, but you definitely will get more than one crack at it as we lead up towards the end of this process. And our next meeting is a month from now, and that would be Tuesday, August 23rd at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, so that will be definitely Zoom, as we continue to do these Zoom meetings. So, so let's just talk, if we could take a minute, and come to some consensus, and then I'll get us a room here. We internally, working with some information that we're going to get from Francisco, kind of need next week to put those maps in shape to sit down and talk. Now, I know I threw out the 4th date, so where's PJ on this call? Because when I just realized that event on the 4th.
Let me put it back up so you can use the calendar. How's that?
Yeah, so I would say.
Of which I'm hoping you're speaking at, Sharon, so.
I will, but so here's my proposal. Because we need that week, and then the following week is, the 2nd is council, the 3rd is planning. So that only would leave us the 4th or the 1st. That I would do, there's a ribbon cutting plan for downtown streetscape phase 1 for those interested in at 5 to 5:15. If we want to do something, I would suggest on the 4th, then I would propose that we do it like at 6 o'clock, if that works for everybody. We'll do it here. You know, I'll get a conference room, I'll get the crayons, we'll get the maps prepared. We probably could do it for Monday the 1st, but the 4th would give us internally a few more days, you know, to get everything prepped for you. I do have the map, the paper maps, but I just, as I said, I want to get the open space map from Francisco and kind of transpose that so I could show you things. We want to get all the schools highlighted in color so we can, you know, assuming that we're all, I guess maybe I shouldn't color them, but marked at least, so that we can color them if we all agree they should stay kind of as an institutional use. So we do need a little bit of time. So I think PJ, if I'm speaking at that, I think I'll be out before 6 o'clock and be back at City Hall, and in the interim, Jen will be here putting everything together. So is everybody okay with the 4th at 6? Do you want to do it? We could do it later. The time, it doesn't matter to me. I was just trying to do it, you know, to everybody's convenience. Again, we would sit down with the people that aren't here. I've talked to Tim Nolan. I know, you know, he wasn't available today. You know, they could take a look at what, you know, we come up with, and if they have additional comments, we can just, you know, we can manage that internally. So is the 4th okay with everybody? Do you want to do it at 6? Do you want to do it at 7?
You already knew where I would be, so you've got me.
So, Sharon, we have our event that rolls right after 5:15. So we have a networking event that's going from 5:30 to 7 o'clock.
Right.
At Los Rivera.
Right.
Oh, I thought we were going to do it immediately following that. Okay, never mind. I have that in my calendar.
I'm out of town after the 2nd, so I'm good on Monday or Tuesday. Not so great Tuesday because of the council meeting Tuesday night, and we've got
and you have caucus on Monday. So I know it's just
right.
Hard.
So I mean, after Tuesday, you guys do what you want. I'm gone that whole month. So
well, we could sit down again. I'm more than willing to sit down individually. I'm just looking at over my shoulder at the other.
I know, but Sharon, it would be, you know, you'd be putting like 900 hours into this. Everybody came to you individually, and that's great. I appreciate that, and I'm going to take you up on it. But you know, don't be so, you know, liberal with your time.
That's fine. This is important, and it's important for me. And
no,
you know,
it is. Yeah.
So. Unless we just do it on, well, yeah, Monday's the council. What was the week before? I looked at Thursday, the 28th. I mean, I think that's okay with me. You want to, do you want to switch it to Thursday, the 28th? That was one of the options. And we'll just work, we'll do what we need to do internally. And that way.
Yeah, we can get a base map to work with for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't make it on Thursday, July 28th, but I can on August 4th. So, but it's up to the majority.
Yeah, I can't make the 28th, but this is going to be challenging here.
Yeah, and Sharon, I'll schedule with you anyway offline because I'll be out that week. So
Okay.
2 sessions, split sessions?
You can do that.
We could do that. Okay, let's do that. I'll try, let me get a room here. We'll do a session on Thursday, the 28th for those who can attend. We'll do a second session on the 4th for those who can attend after I speak at the ribbon cutting. So it'll be in the early evening. And then we'll go from there. I think that's good. That way we can get hopefully everybody in one of those 2 sessions.
Sure.
And then the
Sharon,
feedback.
I could do either date, so put me wherever it's convenient to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell everybody where it is and here in City Hall, and then we'll have the maps and everything ready on those 2 dates, and you can show up either one.
Okay.
So like what, the 28th at 4? There's a ZBA at 7 that night, the Rose Street car dealership thing.
Oh.
But that's at 7 o'clock. So, I mean, that's not,
Yeah.
I don't know what those guys want to do with that. I don't know where they're going.
Yeah, I don't know either. I could do 4. I mean, we could do 4.
What were you thinking?
I just didn't,
Like
I was gonna keep it like after work. We could do 5. That way you're out by 7. Is that okay,
Okay,
Arnie?
all right,
Well, you
yeah,
can't
no,
make that one, Arnie? You can't make that one anyway, right, Arnie?
I can't make the one on the 28th.
But you can come on
August
the 4th.
4th.
Yeah. Okay, so at that time, everybody's looking at the screen, right? So
Yep.
either of those times, and if they don't work, you'll get in touch with me. If not, you'll be reviewing the map as part of the document. So if there's some significant change. But I am offering, obviously, it's really important. You've been in this process the whole time, and you can definitely call me and we'll sit down and talk about it. But we'll start to put crayon to paper on the 28th, and then we'll work over the next week internally to get done what we need to get done to have you focus on those areas, that kind of the west, the central, and the east section, because those are the areas that are served by water and sewer, and have the most potential for change.
Yeah.
And what were you thinking, downstairs and planning or upstairs on the 3rd floor?
I got a call. No, probably upstairs, maybe in the caucus room, because I want to hang some mat. We want to put some things up, maybe here. I have to coordinate with whoever does the. So Thursday the 28th at 5, or Thursday the 8th at 6.
Great, that's very accommodating. I appreciate that.
Okay, and so PJ, you got to get me out of 5:45. I'm kidding.
I think we can make that work.
Yeah, that's fine. It's all good. It's all good. Listen, hey, that's a great ribbon cutting. We're happy to do it. It's just, I didn't realize it was finalized when I sent out the option. So it's all good. We will get this done. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm not even sure if we still have a quorum on or not, but unless Francisco, you don't have anything else, right?
Nothing else from me.
Okay, great job. And just as to go back a little bit for what Francisco said, we are continuing to kind of work with Ben and his team to kind of refine those concepts and decide how best to show them in the plan. Kind of like what we did on the TOD plan, if you recall. So, and they can be really super creative. They won't look like, white boxes.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that you're supportive of these ideas and our approach to demonstrating what's possible before we got too far with developing some nice renderings. But I think I'm hearing that, yes, let's move forward. And in which case, we'll develop some renderings, and it'll be really intended to generate some excitement about what's possible.
Well, if I may, I think you guys are being too modest. Those renderings were great. I was not expecting that at all. And just looking at those, my eyes sort of popped open. I said, okay, I get that. It makes, okay, they weren't, scale models some guy did in his basement over 40 years in a New Yorker piece, but they were they were really good and very instructive. And I just want to thank you guys for throwing that together. It was unexpected and very helpful.
Well, thank you.
Agreed,
Thank you,
Paul. In a
Francis.
couple of cases, I'd take white boxes over what's there now, so.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't want to diss White Street, but yeah. You know.
Okay, and Ed, just a reminder, you'll send us the list of cemeteries and I'll get that to Francisco. And
Yeah,
so,
please.
okay, great. All right, I think we're good. I will take a motion from somebody because I do think.
So moved.
From
Second.
Seconded by Perry, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. We will see you on either of those two dates. And thanks again for